We're back, guys. Alright, so yesterday we read, the last chapter that we read was Genesis 2 yesterday. And that was going over, it was just like a refresher of what went on in Genesis 1. But it goes deeper, more in detail into the creation of man with Adam and Eve. And everything that, man was commanded to do at that time. But now we're going on to Genesis 3. Let's get started. Alright, Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any wild animal which Adonai, God, had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say, 'You are not to eat from any tree in the garden'?" So, the Bible, when it talks about spiritual beings and stuff like that, and even people, most of the time they don't go out and say outright what the thing or person looks like. It's more they use like animals or different things to kind of give you a picture of what that person's like personality is, or like their stature and stuff like that. So the adversary, Satan, which isn't snake in Hebrew, it's a completely different word. He's very crafty, right? It even says, Genesis 3:1, the serpent was more crafty than any wild animal which Adonai had made. So literally, the snake is more wise than a lot of other animals, and that's definitely seen not just in reality out in the wild and stuff like that, but it's even portrayed that way in cartoons that we make. The snake has always been a symbol throughout different cultures for wisdom, and there's nothing wrong with that, because snakes are wise, right? It's a good quality to be wise. The Bible tells us, get wisdom and have knowledge and stuff like that. So it's good to be wise. But when you have pride like Satan has, then that's when being crafty is not good. But we kind of see here too kind of how his manipulation works. He's not going to go right up for what he's going for. He's going to try and, slither his way in and look, harmless and stuff like that. And then when you least expect it, bam, that's when he strikes. So obviously he's not going to be like, blah, 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 you should eat the fruit, because that's just not how he works. The woman answered the serpent, "We may eat from the fruit of the trees of the garden, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, 'You are neither to eat from it, nor touch it, or you will die.'" Now, one thing I want to note here, we just read a chapter ago exactly what God had told Adam to do, right, when it comes to the tree. All he said was don't eat the fruit, and we'll actually go back. You may freely eat from every tree in the garden, right? So, but, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You are not to eat from it, because on the day that you eat from it, it will become certain that you will die. So, if God put him in the garden to tend to all of the plant life and stuff like that, he's still supposed to cultivate the fruit, or he's still supposed to cultivate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He's still supposed to, and to cultivate it, you have to touch it. If you're pruning plants and stuff like that, which is probably what God would have him do, considering that's what he put him in the garden to do, right? He's going to have to touch it. He just said not to eat from it. And then again, like I said in when we were talking about Genesis 1, consuming something isn't just consuming it with your mouth. So she may have been right in saying that, but those weren't God's explicit directions. And you'll find out later on in the Bible, God says not to add to or take away from his word. So what he says is what he says. That's just a little something there. Anyway, the serpent said to the woman, "It is not true that you will surely die, because God knows that on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Now, it's kind of weird that I said, maybe the sin that that Adam and Eve committed from not listening to God is what actually killed them instead of the fruit killing them. Because here we read that that's what Satan says. It's not true that you will surely die, but he says instead of trying to warn people about the problems with not listening to God, he's trying to twist their way of thinking so that it seems like God is trying to one-up them when God doesn't need to do that, nor is he trying to do that. So he's planting a seed of pride in them so that they'll do what they want instead of being humble and recognizing who God is. Okay. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was, that it had a pleasing appearance, and it did, and the tree was desirable for making one wise. So, and that's what it's for, right? She took some of its fruit, and ate. Now, even though it was all of those things, it was pleasing to the eyes, it was good for food, and it could make you wise, right? All of those are good things, but what did God say about it? He said, don't eat it, right? Don't eat it. And that's kind of, you could take that and apply it to all kinds of aspects in your life. There are some things that look good, that are good for you, and are beneficial to you in some other way. But if God says not to indulge in those things, then it's something that we shouldn't indulge in. Because God knows everything. There are probably some kind of hidden outliers or extra information that somebody or something is not telling you willingly, like they know too, and they're not telling you. And that can cause problems for you, and it can ripple out into reality and cause problems for other people, other things, and in ways that you may not even be able to comprehend. So that's why, even though the world may say something about something, right? If God has said no, or God has said yes, then we have to listen to what God says. We have to choose him over the world. Obviously, that didn't happen, and it hasn't happened for a very long time, and it will continue to happen. But it's just something we have to learn from. She also gave some to her husband who was with her. Okay, so here we find out that Adam was right there with her when that happened. Now, it may just be the translation that says this. I don't know, but we'll see. And he ate. So not only was he there, witnessing the snake talking to his wife, trying to get her to eat the fruit, he watched her eat it, and then after she offered it to him, he ate too. like I was talking about in Genesis 2, it's a woman's responsibility to help out her man, and it's a man's responsibility to help out his woman, on top of taking care of the land and taking care of the creatures that are in the land. And when I say the land, I'm also including the sky and the sea, that everything in the scope of planet Earth, and I mean even on to eternity. God's going to have us as stewards over heaven eventually. But we can't be stewards of heaven if we're not stewards down on earth first. Anyway, he was supposed to protect his wife from that. He knew. God told him, spoke to him face to face, was like, hey, eat from whatever tree you want, don't eat from this. I'm giving you a woman to help you with all of this. And he let her do opposite of what God said to do. So all of the responsibility for that, because that is his wife, is on him. He knew the right thing to do, and he didn't do it. She knew the right thing to do, and she didn't do it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. Now see here, it talks about both of their eyes being opened. Both of their eyes being opened in what way is something that we should probably be thinking about right now, because weren't their eyes open, their physical eyes open, when they were hearing the snake talking about the fruit and stuff like that? Well, I would think so, which means they had some kind of eye closed. It was probably their third eye, but why would you need the third eye when you've got God? You see, they didn't put their whole trust in God, and that's what brought them to be prideful, and that's what brought them to eat the fruit. And I was talking about being in a sleep, but in Genesis 2, when God put Adam to sleep, was it that he just went to sleep, or was he still, up, like the lights were on but nobody's home kind of thing? And then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together to make themselves loincloths. They heard the voice of Adonai, God, walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. So the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Adonai among the trees in the garden. So here now that they know what's good and what's evil, right, instead of just trusting on God, they realize what they did was wrong and why it was wrong, right? And they're like, oh crap. And they felt that separation from God already in their heart, but they couldn't hide that. So what did they do? They made clothes to cover up themselves, because they realized that they were bare. They realized, oh, whoa. Whatever they had been doing wrong, that God was already covering with his grace, because he already had a plan from the beginning. He's like, I got it covered. I know what's going on. They realized everything that they may have been doing wrong up until that point. And they're like, oh, wow. They learned the seriousness of what sin causes. And then, on top of that, on top of realizing all of that, here comes God, walking just chilling, already knowing what's going on, but he's just chilling, whistling. The breeze is blowing. He's just whistling, do 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 do, coming along their way, and they're like, "Oh snap!" And so they hide because they're scared. Adonai called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself." He said, "Who told you that you were naked?" Man told on himself. He was trying to hide it, and God answered, and he told on himself. "Have you eaten from the tree from which I ordered you not to eat?" The man replied, "The woman you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate." So this is something that Christians and everybody should just look at and think about here for a second. He knew what he did wrong. God caught him in a lie. Not in a lie, but he caught him in his own, he caught him telling on himself. God asked him what happened, right? And instead of admitting his faults, he put the blame on somebody else. This is a lesson for everybody. We cannot put blame on other people for things that we cause, because we cause problems in our own lives, willingly and unknowingly. And when we find out about the problems that we cause, we can't be putting them on somebody else. We can't be putting the fault on somebody else. We have to be owning up to our actions. And it's clear that owning up to our actions is not something that's embedded in our DNA, because our forefather didn't even do it. So, on top of all this, God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman answered, "The serpent tricked me, so I ate." So not only did the man take the blame and put it on somebody else, the woman took the blame and put it on somebody else too. It takes two to tango, right? Eve should have never listened to the serpent. Adam never should have listened to his wife. The serpent never should have wanted to rebel against God and bring humans down while he was trying to do that. But that's just how it played out, man. And I truly believe that if they would have fessed up, owned up to what they did and asked God for forgiveness, that he would have forgave them and he would have worked things out. And I mean, he did forgive them, but I think it would have panned out differently in a good way. But that's just not how it went. Adonai said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all livestock and wild animals." So it's kind of funny how the serpent was the most crafty of all the animals in the kingdom, and because of this craftiness that he had, what he used his craftiness for, now he's become the most cursed among animals. "You will crawl on your belly and eat dust as long as you live." Now, we already know that snakes have been crawling on their belly, and this is why I say that when the Bible uses animals to describe beings and things like that, it's not that they're literal snakes. It's just, that's just a way of describing somebody. So the adversary who has been in rebellion, he's like a snake. He's crafty. He's very wise. He's very deceptive, very manipulative, very all of those bad traits that a snake are. And like a snake now, he's going to crawl on your belly, and he's going to eat dust. So imagine, he may not be literally crawling on his belly, but imagine having to crawl on your belly for the rest of your life. Like, imagine the perspective that you would have that low to the ground, always, like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have a very good perspective of what's going on everywhere. You've got this limited, like, on the ground, just like, I don't know, no hope kind of. That's how I would feel if I were to have to crawl on my belly for like the eternity. There'd be so many things that I would miss out on just because I would be crawling on my belly for the rest of my life. And eating dust, I want to talk about eating dust, something crazy about eating dust here in a little bit once I finish up some of this chapter. But going on to Genesis 3:15, we've got, I will put animosity between you and the woman, and between your descendant and her descendant. He will bruise your head, and you will bruise his heel. So this is talking about the Son of God, this Jesus Christ. But one thing that we can also look at it as is the animosity between the woman's descendant. Well, the woman's descendant is all of humanity, right? And then the adversary's descendants, as Jesus called them, the son of the devil, right? And the sons of the devil. They may have spiritual, they definitely do have spiritual forms, but they may have physical forms too. And just because just because there are physical descendants, that doesn't mean that there aren't spiritual descendants. Because we may not come from the line of Abraham, which would be a physical descendant, but through Jesus Christ we've been grafted in spiritually, so we're spiritual descendants of Abraham. And just how John was saying that God can make children of Abraham through these stones. That's a paraphrase. Now, he may have been talking about literal stones, or he may have been talking about his own family jewels, kind of like, flipping off the Pharisees and the Sadducees in a way. But what he was saying is that God can make children out of anything he wanted. If he wanted to make plants children of God, he can do that. There's a verse in the Bible that says that if I won't praise God, then the rocks and the animals will. So throughout human history, there's going to be animosity between man and spiritual evil. So we're in constant warfare with spiritual evil. But through Christ we prevail, and we have. He will bruise your head and you'll bruise his heel. That's talking about Jesus. To the woman, he said, I will greatly increase your pain in childbirth. You will bring forth children in pain. So here we see the reason why women have pain in childbirth. They disobeyed God, and that was the punishment that God saw fit. One of the punishments that God saw fit. You will desire, your desire will be towards your husband, but he will rule over you. So, I don't really know too much about what this means exactly, because I think about it, but from what I'm getting, it's that a woman is going to want what her husband wants, wants to please her husband, regardless of whether or not he's a good husband. It's just going to be an innate desire to please him. And I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but to have have that kind of desire when your husband isn't a model husband. I mean, if I were trying to be a model husband and my wife wasn't being a model wife, then I would definitely be upset, so I can understand that. But regardless of whatever situation, whatever kind of person he is, that's going to be her desire. So I can see where that is a punishment. But if we're all living, godly like we're supposed to be, then that's not necessarily a bad thing. To Adam, he said, because you listened to what your wife said and ate from the tree about which I gave you the order, you are not to eat from it, right? See, there it is, reiterating the fact that it wasn't the fruit itself that caused the death, but him not listening to God. Him listening to a creation instead of a creator. Or in this case, the creator. The ground is cursed on your account. You will work hard to eat from it as long as you live. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat field plants. You will eat bread by the sweat of your forehead till you return to the ground, for you were taken out of it. You are dust, and you will return to dust. Okay. So, because man decided to listen to his wife instead of God, the ground is cursed, which means we're going to have to work hard. We're going to work hard our whole lives, and we're going to produce a little. And what we do produce is going to be thorns and thistles. Now, I don't know about you, but thorns and thistles are very annoying. And they hurt. So, it's going to hurt to produce what we get. And it's not going to be a lot. And the only way we're going to eat is by working for it instead of, it coming easy. It's not going to come easy. And then once we go through all that struggle, then we die and we go back to dust. And what I was saying about eating dust, there's a verse in the New Testament where Jesus says the adversary comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but I come to bring life and life everlasting. So, obviously, the adversary is the snake that's talked about in Genesis 3. And the punishment that he gets is to eat dust. Now, isn't it funny that when we die, which is one of the three things that the adversary comes to do, we turn to dust, and that's what he eats. Right? So if the snake has to live on eating dust, that means he has to kill us because we turn to dust, right? And we're us humans, man, is in constant war with the evil spiritual beings. And why is that? Because we're their food. they feed off of our death. And if you want to take that into a physical aspect to apply it to your life, what are some things that are killing you, that you need to, that need your life to sustain them? I hear a lot in a lot of the music that I listen to about the prison system and how they feed off of death. And it makes sense that they would do that. There are institutions in here that feed off of people dying. And so what do? They advertise unhealthy things, and they make these advertisements so appealing to people, right? Just like Satan did with the fruit of the tree of, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He makes it look appetizing. He makes you want it, and then when you finally eat it, it's death. You're literally eating death. But he needs you to eat that death so that he can live. That's why we have to cut things out that produce death, because God doesn't produce death. God gives life. So, yes. Anybody who says life is hard, yes, life is definitely hard. And once we're done living it, we return to dust and die. That is the fate of all man. That's just how it is. Thank God that, Jesus came and did what he did so that we could spend eternity with God in the afterlife. But everybody's got to die once. Some people don't get to live twice, though. All right, continuing on, we've got 4 more verses, and then that's the end of the chapter. Genesis 3:20. The man called his wife Hava, which means life, because she was the mother of all living. Adonai, God, made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. Now, because I've read on more than once, I know that historically, when the Levites would do the sacrifices for atonement and stuff like that, if a person were to sin, someone of the congregation were to sin, they would have to go to a priest, confess that sin, and then bring the appropriate animals for sacrifice. And what the priest would do is offer up the animal to God on the altar, and God would accept that atonement, and they would be atoned for. And what the priest would do is give the hide of the animal to the person who brought the animal, right? And that's pretty symbolic, because it shows that God used that animal as a covering for your sin, so you keep that covering. And that's what Jesus is for us. And that's why I'm talking about it now. God sent Jesus, the spotless lamb, as a sacrifice for us. His blood is sacred. And when we get into Leviticus and we start reading about the sacrifices that they had to offer, you'll start seeing Jesus in all of it. And it's crazy that he's in all of it. But this life is about him, and the next life is about him too. But it's just that we get to share it with him. So, the fact that we see this in Genesis 3 before we even learn about the sacrificial offerings and stuff like that. It's kind of like another seed being planted. Like, why does it talk about this? What does this even mean? And some people will be like, that makes no sense to be there, but it does. Because God, even then, at the beginning of all of this, God still provided, he still provided a sacrifice, right? If Jesus was always there, then Jesus also has always been the sacrifice, you know what I mean? So that's probably another reason why grace is so, it's just before we were even here, you know what I mean? God always had it covered. Oh, where are we at? Okay. Adonai, God said, "See, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, to prevent his putting out his hand and taking also from the tree of life, eating and living forever. Therefore, Adonai sent him out of the Garden of Eden to cultivate the ground from which he was taken. So he drove the man out, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and a flaming sword which turned in every direction to guard the way to the tree of life." So that was the end of Genesis chapter 3. And after, you remember when we were first talking about Adam realizing, oh, I messed up, and how he felt it in his heart, but he couldn't cover it up in there, so he made clothes as a covering. God gave him a covering too. But when we sin, there is a separation from God, and that makes sense because all sin is going against what God has said. So because they went against what God has said, and what God says brings life, right? If you go against what God says, then you're accepting death, right? So because heaven and earth are meeting in this paradise in Eden, and God is there, and there's life there and stuff like that, because they chose to disobey God and they chose death, they had to be separated from him. There's no longer heaven and earth. There's no longer God and man. It's God and his everything, and then man off by his own. Separated from God, because why? God is holy. There's no evil in God. And because man committed that evil by going against what God said, he can't be in the presence of God anymore. So he got booted. And that is what happens to us every time that we sin. That is why we need to always be asking for forgiveness, and we need to be proactively getting out of whatever is causing us to sin. If it be your eye, Jesus said to pluck it out. If it's your hand causing you to sin, cut it off. It's better that you go to heaven maimed than going to hell with a whole body. And if you don't cut the sin out, right, God's going to cut you off. And that's what he did to Adam. Because not only did he eat the fruit, right, he didn't confess that he ate the fruit of his own, he did it himself. He didn't confess that he did it himself. He tried to put the blame on somebody else. And he knows good and evil now. So he didn't know good and evil when he ate the fruit. But once he ate the fruit, he knew good and evil, right? He knew good and evil at that point. And he still didn't confess. He still wasn't humble with his confession. He was like, yeah, I did it, but she made me do it. Instead of saying, yes, God, I did it. And I realize now what I did. I'm sorry. Grace, dude. God knew everything. And he still chose to forgive him. And that's what we need to do. Where are we at? We already finished it, but so yeah, there's no way that he's going to be able to come back from that. And now we know where we stand. At least to that point, we understand where man stood with God at that point. Not in a very good place. Later on today, probably before I go to work, maybe after I come back from work, we'll go ahead and read chapter 4. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. You can go back and reread. Like I said yesterday, definitely meditate on chapter 3. Think about what it means to disobey God and the consequences of doing so. I'll be praying for you. I'm about to pray after I post all of this stuff. But just know, anybody watching this, and for anybody who isn't watching this, as long as they accept a prayer, I'm praying for them. Oh, I found my keys. That's awesome. Thank you, God. All right. You guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you later on tonight.